The first snow of the season had come down in the night, and by the time Harriet Ashcombe unlatched the back door of her little bakery at 4 in the morning, the lane behind the shop was already white to the ankle. She stood in the doorway for a breath, feeling the cold set its teeth against her face, and thought, as she often did in that hour, that a woman of her size at least had the dignity of never being blown over by a north wind. Small mercies. She counted them each morning like a miser counting farthings, because it was the only currency she had left. The oven was warm behind her. That was the second mercy. The third was that the flour had held out another week. The fourth was that no bailiff had knocked yet on the shutters of the shop her father had left her, though the note against it was due within the fortnight. And she had, if she was honest with the ledger, and she was always honest with the ledger, perhaps 11 shillings and 4pence. She had begun, in the last month, to think of the ledger as a kind of little cold book that counted her, the way the world had always counted her. She peddled bread to get by. That was the whole of it. The rest, she told herself, was decoration. Now there is a thing you must understand, child, before we go any further into this tale, and it is that the world had already decided about Harriet Ashcombe by the time she was 27, and it had not been kind in its deciding. She was a large woman, broad in the shoulder, broad in the hip, a stout woman whose mother had once in a moment of tenderness called her handsome of frame, and whose aunts, in less tender moments, had called her every uglier variant of the same. The village of Marwood-under-Hill had watched her fail to marry, and had come to its verdict without hurry, that Miss Ashcombe was a good soul and a fair hand at a loaf, and a woman of her size, no man of rank was likely to look twice, and better she should keep the shop than trouble herself with hoping. She had trained herself, over years, not to let the verdict show on her face. It was a discipline. She wore it now, like a well-pressed apron. She stepped out into the lane with the first tray of the day. 6 small brown loaves, wrapped in a clean cloth, still warm enough that the flakes of snow melted where they landed. 2 of the loaves were sold already, promised to the doctor's wife at the far end of the village, and to old Mr. Peel, who kept the toll. The other 4 she would take up to the market square and set on the plank outside the shop, and by 10 o'clock they would be gone, or they would not, and the day would be what it was. At the mouth of the lane, where it opened onto the low wall of the churchyard, a man was sitting in the snow. She did not see him at once. She saw only a shape, dark against the whitened stone, and she thought it a heap of rags left there by some careless carter. Then the shape moved, drew one long leg up under itself, and coughed, a low, dry cough that made her stop where she stood. "Sir," she said. She did not raise her voice. In her experience, men who slept in churchyards did not care to be shouted at. "Sir, you'll die there if you sit." He looked up. Even in the half-dark, she could see he was younger than she had assumed. Not old, not a broken thing, only unshaven and hollow-eyed, with a coat that had been good once and was not good now. His face beneath the growth of beard was lean and hard and gave her nothing. His eyes, when they met hers, were a very cold gray and steady, and taking her in with a kind of thoroughness she did not, for a moment, know what to do with. "I have sat in colder places," he said. His voice surprised her. It was low and clean, and did not belong to the coat. "That may be true," Harriet said, "but you are not sitting in one now. Come out of the wet, at least. There is a step under the eave of the shop. It will keep the worst of it off you." He looked at her a moment longer. She had the unpleasant sense, while he did it, that he was reading something in her face she had not put there on purpose. Then he rose slower than she liked to see a young man rise, and she understood by the way he set his hand on the wall that he had not eaten in a while. She unwrapped the cloth, took out one of the small brown loaves and held it out to him. "I cannot pay," he said. "I did not ask you to." "You will regret it," he said. "There is nothing more expensive than a habit of kindness." "That," said Harriet, "is a very grand thing to say for a man sitting in a churchyard. Take the bread, sir, or I will leave it on the wall, and the birds will take it, and I will have wasted a loaf." On principle, he took the bread. His hand, she noticed, was not the hand of a man who had lived his life outdoors. The nails were clean under the dirt. The knuckles were not swollen. The fingers were long, and, when they closed round the loaf, closed with a kind of careful economy she had seen in gentlemen once, years ago, when her father had still been well enough to sell to the great house. She did not remark on it. She stepped past him, up the lane toward the square, and did not look back, because, looking back at hungry men was a way to lose the whole morning. She noticed, though, and afterwards she would remember, she had noticed, that he did not begin to eat until she was out of sight. He watched her go up the lane, her broad back straight under the shawl, her step even in the fresh snow, and he thought, without meaning to think it, that she moved like a woman who had never once been asked whether she was tired. It was the first thing about her he catalogued. It would not be the last. His name was Alistair Ravenshaw, and he was the 5th Duke of Ravenshaw, and no one within 30 miles knew it, because he had not chosen to be known. He had ridden out of his own gates 4 days before, with a saddlebag, an old coat that had once belonged to a gamekeeper, and a question he could not answer at his own table. His steward had begged him not to go. His sister had wept. His son had said nothing, because his son had said nothing to anyone for 9 months, and that was, in the end, why the Duke was sitting on a churchyard wall in a village he did not know, letting a large baker-woman feed him, because she thought he was going to freeze. He had come out to find, without the buffer of his title, whether there was any goodness left in the country his father had taught him to distrust. His father had said near the end that a man of rank could not know the true measure of anyone, because rank distorted every mirror. "Learn the world without your name, boy," the old man had said, "or you will marry a woman who wants your house and raise a son who wants your grave." Alistair had listened. He had a habit of listening. He had in fact made a study of the trustees his father had appointed for his son's small inheritance from the boy's mother, and he did not trust one of them. And he had 6 weeks before he must sign a document that would place his son's future in that man's hand, or refuse the placing and provoke a legal war he was not certain he could win alone. He needed, before he signed anything, to know how to tell true kindness from performed kindness. He had come out into the snow to learn. He had so far been spat at by a publican, refused shelter at 3 farmhouses, laughed at by a curate, and stolen from by a boy who took his last shilling while pretending to help him up out of a ditch. He had begun to think his father had been right. Then a big woman in a flowery apron had told him he would die if he sat, and had given him bread she could not spare, and had walked off without waiting to be thanked. He ate the loaf slowly, because he had learned by now that eating quickly on an empty stomach was a fool's economy. He tasted, in the crust, that she had baked it herself. There was a fineness in the crumb that a careless hand did not produce. He noticed the small burnt place on one edge where the loaf had touched the wall of the oven, and she had not cut it away to make the loaf prettier for sale. She had sent out an honest loaf. It was, he thought, a small thing. It was also, if he was going to be honest with himself, the first honest thing anyone in this parish had shown him. He rose from the wall, brushed the snow from his coat, and followed her up the lane toward the square. At a distance a hungry man could plausibly keep. The market was thin that morning, because of the weather. Harriet set her plank outside the shop, and laid the 4 loaves on it, under a second clean cloth, and she stood a little way back where the wind was less, and she watched them, the way she watched everything, which was steadily and without seeming to hand. Old Mrs. Fenn came by and bought one and complained about the price, which was the same price it had been for 2 years. Mr. Peel's boy came for his father's loaf and paid in coppers, still warm from being kept in a fist. The doctor's maid came for the doctor's wife's loaf, and stayed to gossip about the goings-on at the great house up on the hill. And Harriet listened with a courteous face, and heard perhaps half of it, because she was watching. Out of the tail of her eye. By Spee, the man in the poor coat, who had come to stand at the far edge of the square, and had not begged, and had not moved. He noticed the servant girl's tired hands. He noticed the way the doctor's maid pitched her laughter a shade too loud when the butcher passed. He noticed a boy of about 10, leaning against the wheelwright's cart and easing 3 apples one by one into the front of his shirt, while the wheelwright's back was turned. He noticed the baker woman noticed the boy too. He noticed her not say anything. He noticed, when the wheelwright turned, that the boy had already stepped away and the apples were gone. And he noticed that Harriet Ashcombe, standing at her plank, said, "Mrs. Fenn, come here a moment. I have set aside a heel of yesterday's for you, no charge," and drew the woman's attention from the direction of the boy, long enough for the boy to disappear into the lane behind the smithy. He did not know why he was cataloguing these things. He knew only that he was, and that he had not catalogued anyone quite so carefully in a long time. At noon the last loaf went, and Harriet folded her cloth, and took her plank inside, and sat down at the small table in the back of the shop, and permitted herself for one honest minute to close her eyes. Her feet hurt. Her hands, which had been in and out of hot dough and cold water since 4, hurt in a way that she was beginning to think would not stop hurting even in her sleep. £7 owed, 11 shillings and 4pence in the box. A fortnight. She did not open the ledger. She knew what it said. She opened her eyes when she heard the shop bell, and rose again, and set her face in the polite, pleasant shape she kept for the front counter. And there was the man from the churchyard, standing just inside the door with the snow melting off his coat onto her clean floor. "You followed me," she said. "I did," he said. "I wanted to know your name. That is a great deal of trouble to go to for a name." "It is a small trouble," he said, "for a woman who fed me on nothing but her own judgment." She looked at him for a long moment. He met the look. He did not shift or shuffle or do any of the things she was used to seeing men do when a large plain-faced woman looked them in the eye without flinching. He stood there and let her look. "Harriet Ashcombe," she said at last. "Miss, this is my father's shop, and mine now that he is dead." "And you, sir, Alistair?" he said. He hesitated only a hair's breadth, and she saw the hesitation, though she did not know what it meant. "Alistair Raven, I am traveling." "Traveling to where?" "I have not decided." "A man of leisure, then, in a coat like that." "A man of question," he said, "in a coat that suits the question." She almost smiled. She did not let him see it. "Well, Mr. Raven," she said, "you cannot travel further today. The road north closes with any wind, and the wind is up. If you have coin, the fleece will take you. If you have not, there is a barn at the back of the yard that keeps the wet off, and I will bring you soup at 6, and you will chop me a stack of kindling in the morning for the trouble. That is the whole of it. Do not thank me. I am tired of being thanked for what any decent person would do." "I did not intend to thank you," he said. "I intended to ask what you would tell me." "The price was, if I asked the price of what?" "Of the soup." "There is no price of the soup. There is always a price," he said quite softly. "Not here," she said. "Not tonight. Tomorrow you may pay in kindling." "That is the whole of my ambition, Mr. Raven. I run a small shop, and I mean to keep it, and I do not have the strength for the sort of philosophy you are trying to have with me at the counter. Go and put your feet by the barn stove. There is one. It smokes. Do not burn my barn down." He inclined his head. It was a small movement, and precise, and it did not belong to the coat, any more than his voice or his hands did. She saw it. She filed it away with the clean nails and the careful fingers, and the way he had said your judgment as though he meant it. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, "Mr. Raven." He went. She stood behind the counter with her hand flat on the wood, and she thought quietly and without flourish that a woman who had been overlooked all her life ought to know better than to be flattered by a stranger's attention. And yet, that is how it began, child, not with a ballroom or a proposal or a great door thrown open. With a loaf of bread on a churchyard wall, and a man who had walked out of his own house to learn whether there was any goodness left in the world, and a woman who had never once been asked whether she was tired. He slept in her barn for 3 nights. On the second morning he chopped enough kindling to last her through Christmas, and he did it with the kind of efficiency that told her he had not, in fact, done a great deal of chopping in his life, but had learned the trick of it quickly, as clever men do. On the second evening, he mended the latch on her back door without being asked, using the tools from her father's box that she had not touched since the funeral. On the third morning, she came out to find him sitting on the barn step reading, of all things, her father's old copy of Blackstone's Commentaries, which she had left in the tack cupboard because she did not know what else to do with it, and could not bear to sell. "Mr. Raven," she said from the doorway, "that is a curious book for a vagrant." He closed it without haste. "It is a curious book for anyone. My father read law before he took the shop. He said a baker with a book kept his crusts even, and his temper level. Your father sounds a wise man. He was a stubborn man, and stubbornness is often mistaken for wisdom in men. It was he who taught me the ledgers." She stepped down into the yard. "You read law yourself?" He looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw a small careful thing happen behind his eyes, as though a door had opened a finger's width and closed again. "I read what comes to my hand." He said that, said Harriet, "is not an answer." "No," he said, "it is not." She let it lie. She had lived long enough to know that a man who did not want to answer a question would not be improved by having it asked twice. She said instead, "There is porridge in the kitchen. I have made too much. As usual. Come in and eat it before it cools, or the pig will have it, and I do not, in point of fact, own a pig." He came in. He ate at her scrubbed pine table across from her, and she watched him, and she noticed, for she was not blind, whatever the village thought of her, that he ate slowly, and that he set his spoon down between mouthfuls, and that he waited for her to lift hers first, and that these were not the manners of a man who had learned them by watching, but of a man who had had them beaten into him. "Young Mr. Raven," she said when they had finished, "may I say a thing? You may say anything. You are not what you are pretending to be." He did not answer at once. He set his spoon precisely across his empty bowl. He looked up at her, and the cold gray eyes were not cold now, only steady, and something in them was a little tired. "No," he said, "I am not." "Then you should go," she said, "because I am a woman who cannot afford a lodger, and I am certainly a woman who cannot afford a lodger who is lying to me, however politely. However politely. I have been treated as a fool by better liars than you. Mr. Raven and I have made a rule about it. What is the rule? That I will not be a fool twice for the same man." He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "If I told you the truth, Miss Ashcombe, would you believe me?" "I do not know," said Harriet. "Try." He did not try then, he asked instead. "For another day." He said there was something he needed to know before he could tell her, and that he would not lie to her again, and that if she wished him to sleep in the churchyard rather than her barn until he had it, he would go without complaint. She looked at him a long time, and she said, "You may have your day." And Mr. Raven, one day. Not two. He bowed. Small, precise. The bow of a man who had bowed at courts. She saw it. She said nothing. He was gone by noon. He did not take the coat she had offered him, nor the second loaf she had wrapped for him, nor anything but himself and the book, which he handed back at the door with both hands, as though it mattered. She watched him walk down the lane in the direction of the great house on the hill, and she thought, well, well. And she went back into the shop and served bread until dusk, and did not let herself think about him, and thought about him anyway. That evening, when she had shut the shop, and was counting the coins into the box at the back, a good day, 6 shillings, enough to eat by, not enough to save. There was a knock at the shop door that was not the knock of a customer. It was too heavy and too precise. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to open it. There was a man on the step, in a coat far finer than the one Alistair Raven had worn. He was a small, tidy person, with a face like a well-kept ledger, and a hat he did not remove when she opened the door. "Miss Ashcombe," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. My name is Mr. Pruitt. I represent the trustees of the late Mrs. Anne Ashcombe, formerly of this parish. I understand you are her surviving daughter." Harriet's hand closed on the edge of the door. Her mother had been dead 17 years. No one had spoken of her mother's business to Harriet in 17 years. She had understood, from her father, that there had been nothing to speak of. A small dowry consumed by his own bad investments. A debt discharged. A life closed. "I am," she said carefully. "May I come in?" She let him in. She set him at the pine table where the Vagrant had sat that morning. He opened a leather case and set out 3 sheets of paper with the careful ceremony of a man who liked being watched. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, "your mother was the youngest child of the late Sir Reginald Marwood of Marwood Hall, as I believe you know." "I know it." "You may not know that upon her death, a small trust was constituted for the benefit of any surviving issue, with the income to be held until the said issue reached the age of 30, or married, whichever occurred first." She stared at him. "I am 27. "Just so. In 3 years, or upon your marriage, the corpus of that trust, some £470, together with certain lands adjacent to Marwood Hall, would revert to you absolutely. £470. She did not permit her face to move. Inside her, the ledger, which had said 11 shillings and 4 for a great many mornings, began to do something quite complicated. "Hi. There is, however," said Mr. Pruitt, "a difficulty." "There always is," said Harriet quite pleasantly. "Please." He slid the first paper toward her. It was a deed of assignment, signed with her father's shaky last hand, dated 3 months before his death, purporting to sell all rights and interest in the said trust for the sum of £100 to a Mr. Silas Corvin, gentleman of London. "Mr. Corvin," said Pruitt, "has now come forward with the deed and claims the trust. The trustees have summoned a hearing at Marwood Hall the day after tomorrow, to determine the validity of the assignment. As the surviving issue, you are entitled to be present, and to speak." "My father," said Harriet slowly, "would not have sold my mother's trust. He did not know it existed. He believed there was nothing." "That," said Pruitt, "is what you will have to prove. In 3 days before the trustees. I am obliged, as a matter of professional courtesy, to bring the matter to your attention. I am not, I should say, in a position to assist you further. Mr. Corvin is a client of my firm. He rose. He put on his hat, which he had not removed. He went. Harriet sat at her pine table and looked at the paper. Her father's signature was on it. It was a signature, and it was not a signature. She had seen her father write his name 1,000 times. He crossed his T with an upward stroke that lifted off the paper. The T on this deed did not lift. It sat, small and neat, like a T drawn by a man who had studied her father's hand, but had not in the end watched him breathe. Forgery, she thought, and the word rang in her small kitchen like a bell. She could not prove it, not alone. Not in 3 days. Not against a gentleman of London, with a firm behind him. She was a large baker woman, with 11 shillings, and a fortnight before the shop went. And she was 27, and a spinster, and no one at Marwood Hall would listen to her. She sat with her hands flat on the table. She would go. She decided. She would go. And she would say what she knew. And they would refuse her most likely, and she would lose the trust in the shop and every other thing, and she would still go, because a woman who did not fight for her own mother's name did not deserve to eat her own bread. The rule, she thought bleakly, was not to be a fool twice for the same man. It had not, alas, said anything about being a fool once for her father. She was still sitting there when the knock came again, a different knock, quieter, and she rose and went to the door, with the flat weariness of a woman who had already been called on by a small tidy trustee that evening, and had no reserves for a second. Alistair Raven stood on her step. He had shaved. He had a clean coat that fit him properly, and that had unmistakably been cut in London by a man who was paid a great deal to cut coats. He was holding his hat in his hand, and behind him, in the lane, stood a groom with 2 horses, and behind the groom, on the far corner where the churchyard began, stood a carriage, with a small crest on the door that even Harriet, who did not read crests, understood was not the crest of any local man. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, and his voice was the same voice, only steadier now, without the tiredness she had heard in the churchyard. "I said I would tell you the truth. May I come in?" She stepped back from the door. She did not speak. She was not, at that moment, certain she could. He came in. He did not sit. He set his hat on the pine table beside the papers Mr. Pruitt had left, and he saw the papers, and his eyes changed. "Mr. Raven," she said. "Ravenshaw," he said. "Alistair Ravenshaw, Duke of Ravenshaw. The house on the hill, Miss Ashcombe, is mine. I have been walking about your parish for a fortnight, in a coat that did not suit me, because I wished to learn a thing I could not learn from my own chair. I have learned it. And I owe you the truth, at least if I owe you nothing else." She sat down. She did so slowly because her knees, which had held up under a great many things, chose that particular moment to consult with her about whether they meant to go on holding. "A duke," she said. "Yes. Sat in my churchyard." "Yes. Ate my bread." "Yes. And let me tell him to chop kindling." "You did not tell me. You asked me. And I chopped it badly." "You chopped it," she said. "Very well." She heard her own voice, distant and steady. "Mr. Ravenshaw." "Your Grace? I do not know what one calls a duke." "One has fed on nothing. I have had a strange evening, and I am about to have a stranger one, and I would be obliged, if you have come to explain yourself, that you do it now, and briefly. Because I have to be at Marwood Hall the day after tomorrow, to save my mother's name, and I have not yet worked out how." He looked at her, he looked at the papers, he lifted one of them and read it. And his face did the small closing thing she had seen before, only this time, it did not close and open. It set. "Silas Corvin," he said, very quietly. "You know him. I know the name. He is one of my son's trustees. He has been the reason I have been walking about in a poor coat for a fortnight, Miss Ashcombe, though I did not think, when I began, that I would find him at your table." She stared at him. "Your son," she said. "My son is 9 years old. His name is Thomas. His mother died 14 months ago, and he has not spoken a word since the day of the funeral. And Silas Corvin was appointed trustee of the small inheritance she left him, and is, I believe, engineering a petition to have Thomas declared incapable of managing the estate on his majority, and to have himself installed as its guardian in perpetuity. I have 6 weeks to sign or to fight, and if I fight I must know whom I can trust. That is why I came out. That is what I was learning. And you, Miss Ashcombe, fed me on the first morning of the first day, and did not ask me for a farthing, and I have not been fed for nothing in 9 years." She sat there. "Your Grace," she said, "I think I would like a cup of tea." He almost smiled. "I would like one also, Miss Ashcombe, if you will trust me to boil the water without setting your barn on fire." She rose. She did not, in the end, let him boil the water. A lifetime of habit sent her hands to the kettle before her mind caught up. He sat, at last, at her pine table, and folded his hands like an ordinary man, and let her make him tea in her own kitchen, and she thought, well then. They talked half the night. He told her about his son, and about the day of the funeral, when Thomas had knelt at the graveside, and said very clearly, "I sang to mother when she was ill. The nurse said singing tired her. I sang to her 3 times the night she died. It was me, I did it, and had not spoken since." That the boy believed, with the whole clean logic of a child of 8, that his voice had killed his mother, that he did not open his mouth now for fear of what it might loose upon the world, that every governess and physician and clergyman who had tried had made it worse by treating the silence as disobedience. He told her about Silas Corvin and the pattern of small legal maneuvers over the past year, and the forged codicils he suspected but could not prove alone. She told him about her father, who had loved her mother badly and well, and had never once, in 17 years, mentioned a trust. She told him about the tea that did not lift. She showed him. He looked at the paper for a long time. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, "may I ask you something?" "You may. If I asked you to come with me to Marwood Hall the day after tomorrow, not as a supplicant, but as a woman with a case and a duke at her side, would you come?" "On what terms, your Grace?" He did not answer with flattery. She had noticed already that he did not. He said, "On the terms you set. Name them." She looked at him across the pine table. She could feel her own face, the plain, broad face the village had verdicted upon at 7, and she felt for once no distance between what she was and what she meant to say. "Then hear them," she said. "She kier. I will not enter that hall as your grateful, hired witness. I will enter it as a woman with a claim, and you will speak of me as such. You will not present me as a curiosity, or as your kindness. I have been someone's kindness before, and I did not care for the fit. If I speak my own words. If I lose on my own account. And when this is done, your Grace, whatever else you owe me or do not owe me, you will not offer me money in place of a thank you. I have fed you a loaf, that was a gift. It does not become a bill because you turned out to have pockets." He watched her while she said it. He did not interrupt. When she was done, he was quiet a moment, and then he said, "Miss Ashcombe, those are the terms. You agree. I agree. I would add one. If you would permit me, add it. That when I need advice at that table. And I will, you will give it plainly, and not pretend to be less clever than you are, for the comfort of the men in the room." She looked at him. She thought quite clearly, so this is what it feels like to be asked. "Your Grace," she said, "I have not pretended to be less clever than I was since I was 14 years old, and it has cost me every suitor I might have had. I will not begin pretending on your account. Good, he said. I did not think you would. He rose to go. Then he set his hat on his head. At the door he paused and turned back, and said, There is another thing, Miss Ashcombe. May I bring Thomas to meet you? Tomorrow. Only for an hour. He will not speak. He may not look at you. I do not ask you to work miracles. I ask only that he sit in a warm kitchen with a person who is not afraid of silence. Your Grace, she said, bring him. He brought the boy the next morning at 10. Thomas Ravenshaw was small for 9 and thin, and had his father's cold gray eyes, only they were not cold in the boy. They were only closed the way a shutter is closed against a light too strong. He came into her kitchen holding his father's hand, and he did not look at her, and he did not answer when she said good morning, and Alistair did not, thank God, prompt him. She set a mug of warm milk in front of him, and a piece of yesterday's soft bread, and she said, Master Thomas, I am going to knead the day's dough. If you would like to watch, you may, and if you would like to help me count out the loaves, I would be glad of it. And if you would like to sit and drink your milk and do nothing at all, that is also a good use of a morning. I have done all 3 in my time, and I recommend the 3rd. He did not answer. He did not look up, but when she began the kneading, he watched her hands. She saw him watch. She did not turn her head. She kneaded, and she talked to him. Not at him, but to him, as one talks to a shy dog. About the flour, about the yeast, about the way her father had taught her that dough was a stubborn creature and needed to be persuaded rather than beaten. She said at one point, My mother used to sing while she baked. I do not sing. My voice is not made for it, but I remember hers. It is a thing you keep, a voice you loved. It does not go away. She did not look at him. She did not underline the word. She let it lie in the flour with the rest. When they left, an hour later, he had not spoken. But at the door, still holding his father's hand, he turned his face for one long moment and looked directly at her. His eyes were his father's, cold and thorough. He did not smile, he did not wave. He looked. It was, Harriet thought, the same look his father had given her in the churchyard that first morning, a taking in, without demand. She curtsied to him. She had not curtsied in years. She did it now, because he was a small grave person, and it seemed the right courtesy. He blinked once, and looked away, and went. Alistair, at the gate, said quietly, Miss Ashcombe, thank you. Do not thank me. Your Grace, I did nothing. You did not, he said. Hurry him. That is what you did. It is more than most. He noticed the boy's hand relax in his own as they walked away. He did not say so. He walked back to the great house with his son at his side, and thought, without permitting the thought to become anything larger than itself, that he had needed a person who was not afraid of silence for a very long time, and had begun to think there was no such person in England. Marwood Hall was cold, and full of men, and the men were of the kind who had known Harriet Ashcombe as a fat little girl, and had not, in 17 years, revised their conclusions. She walked into the long room on Alistair's arm, and she felt every eye go from her face to her figure, to her plain dark gown and back, and she felt the old verdict settle on her like a shawl she had worn too long. She lifted her chin. She had lived in the shawl. Silas Corvin was there. She had never seen him before. He was a smooth, pleasant, handsome man, of perhaps 40, with a mouth cut for smiling, and eyes that did not smile with it. He rose when Alistair entered, and bowed, with the exactness of a man who had bowed to the Duke of Ravenshaw many times, and he said, Your Grace, this is an unexpected honor. I had not thought this matter grand enough for your attention. Mr. Corvin, said Alistair, I take an interest in the affairs of your firm's clients. Miss Ashcombe is present at my invitation. Miss Ashcombe, may I present Mr. Corvin? Mr. Corvin, Miss Harriet Ashcombe of this parish. Corvin's eyes went to her. She saw the small, pleasant mouth take her in and dismiss her. Miss Ashcombe, he said, how kind of His Grace to bring you. I hope you are not distressed by the proceedings. They must seem quite involved to a woman of, more domestic accomplishments. The old her would have colored. She had trained the coloring out of her cheek years ago. She said, Mr. Corvin, I am distressed by very little. Please continue. The trustees sat at the long table, the papers were produced. Mr. Corvin spoke smoothly for a quarter of an hour about the assignment, and the price paid, and the propriety of the transaction. Pruitt, who was present as clerk, made small notes and did not look at Harriet. When Corvin had done, the senior trustee, Sir Bertram Whitlock, turned his heavy old head and said, Miss Ashcombe, do you wish to speak? I do, Sir Bertram. She rose. She did not tremble. She had trembled enough in her life for tremble to be. On this particular morning, an old friend she had already sent home. Sir Bertram, she said, gentlemen, my father was Josiah Ashcombe, baker of this parish, and he was a stubborn man and a decent one. And he did not, in the last 3 months of his life, sell my mother's trust to any man in London. He did not, gentlemen, know of it. He believed the money gone. He said so to me on his deathbed, when he apologized for leaving me nothing but the shop. He would not have apologized, gentlemen, had he sold my mother's inheritance for £100. He would have given me the £100. He was that sort of man. Corvin smiled. A touching account, Miss Ashcombe, but scarcely evidence. I have not finished, Mr. Corvin. My father wrote his name in a particular way. I have watched him do it since I was old enough to hold a slate. When he crossed the T of Ashcombe, he lifted the pen upward, off the paper. It was a habit. He was proud of the name. On the deed you have produced, the T does not lift. The T sits flat. My father did not sign that deed. Someone else did, and did it well, and did not know the man well enough to know his T. The room was quiet. Sir Bertram picked up the paper. Corvin said more sharply, Miss Ashcombe, are you accusing me of forgery? I am not accusing anyone in this room of anything, Mr. Corvin. I am telling the trustees what I know of my father's hand. They will judge the rest. I have brought with me 3 notes, signed by my father in the 6 months before his death. An order to the miller, a receipt to the smith, a letter to the parson. In each, the T lifts. In none does it sit as it sits on your deed, Ryeforce. That is the whole of what I know. I leave the conclusion, gentlemen, to men with more experience of paper than I have. She sat down. Sir Bertram peered at the papers. He passed them to the trustee at his right, who peered at them also. Somewhere down the table a man said, By God, Alister. Then Alister rose. Sir Bertram, he said, if I may, Miss Ashcombe has spoken to the question of the deed. I have a separate matter to raise, which touches upon Mr. Corvin's fitness to serve as trustee to my son. I have, over the past year, retained a private clerk of some ability to review Mr. Corvin's stewardship of the several small trusts he administers in this county. I have with me a summary. It is not conclusive. It is, however, suggestive. Mr. Corvin has, on 4 separate occasions, presented to trustees deeds of assignment executed by parties conveniently deceased, at prices conveniently below the corpus, in favor of gentlemen conveniently resident in London. The pattern is not in itself criminal. It is, in aggregate, of interest. I ask only that this matter, and Miss Ashcombe's matter, be adjourned to permit examination by an independent hand. If Mr. Corvin is innocent, no harm is done him. If he is not, harm is prevented to others. Silas Corvin's pleasant mouth stopped smiling. It was the first honest thing Harriet had seen his face do. "Your Grace," he began. "Mr. Corvin," said Alistair, without raising his voice at all. "Cruelty seems already abundant this morning. I see no reason to add mine. You will sit down." He sat down. He sat down because a duke had told him to sit down, and because the trustees had already turned their old heavy heads to look at him, and because the pleasant mouth had for a moment forgotten how to be pleasant. They adjourned. They adjourned that morning, and they adjourned the following week, and by the end of the month a very careful clerk with a magnifying glass had confirmed what a baker's daughter had seen with her eye, and by the end of 6 weeks Silas Corvin had left the county in the cold, quiet fury of a man who had been beaten not by force. The trust reverted. The lands adjoining Marwood Hall were Harriet's absolutely. Thomas Ravenshaw's guardianship stayed with his father, uncontested, because the trustees had, quite suddenly, discovered a great deal of respect for the Duke's judgment. None of that, however, was the thing. The thing, if you must have the thing, happened a fortnight after the first hearing, on an afternoon in the middle of January. When the snow had melted, and the lane behind the shop was mud, and the shop had been open for 4 hours, and had sold 9 loaves, which was a very great many. Harriet had brought a chair out onto the step, and was sitting in the pale sun mending an apron, and she looked up and saw Alistair Ravenshaw and his son coming down the lane, hand in hand, in coats that fit and boots that did not leak, and she thought, oh, dear. They stopped at her step. Thomas was carrying, with great care, a small pot of hyacinths, wrapped in brown paper. "Miss Ashcombe," said Alistair. "Your Grace, Thomas has something he wishes to give you." The boy stepped forward. He held out the pot with both hands. She took it. She looked into his small, grave face, and she said, "Master Thomas, this is a very kind gift, thank you." He looked at her. He drew in a breath. It was a small breath, and it caught, as breaths catch when a thing has been held too long. "Thank you," he said, "for the bread. It was not much." It was a whole sky spoken into a February afternoon. She did not cry. She had trained, crying out of her face at 14, along with coloring. She said gravely, "You are welcome, Master Thomas. There will be more bread whenever you would like it. It is a shop, you see. That is what it is for." He almost smiled. It was a very small, almost. It was more than she had thought a child of his kind could give in a lifetime. She curtsied to him. He inclined his head, the small, precise inclination she had first seen at her pine table over porridge, and only then did she understand where he had learned it, and he stepped back and took his father's hand again. Alistair was looking at her, not at her figure, not at her plain, broad face, at her, in the way he had first looked at her from the churchyard wall, thoroughly without demand, but with the door in his eyes open now, not a finger's width, but standing quite plain. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, "would you walk with me a little way? Thomas will sit with Mrs. Fenn at the end of the lane. She has offered. He knows her hyacinths." She rose. She left the apron on the chair. She walked with him past the smithy and the churchyard, and out onto the field path that ran along the low wall toward the river, and neither of them spoke for 100 yards, because there was no need. "Miss Ashcombe," he said at last. "Your Grace, Harriet." She stopped walking. She turned to him. She said, "That is a great liberty, Your Grace." "It is," he said. "I have been taking liberties with you since the morning I sat in your churchyard and did not tell you my name. I have been taking them steadily. I have kept a careful ledger of them. I have come to give you the ledger." "Have you?" I noticed the servant girl's tired hands. "At the market," he said, "I noticed the doctor's maid laugh too loud. I noticed a boy of 10. steal 3 apples. And I noticed you notice him also, and not say. I noticed the burnt place on the crust of the loaf you gave me, and I noticed that you had not cut it away to prettify the loaf, because you had baked an honest one. I noticed that you moved as though no one had ever asked you if you were tired. I noticed that when you spoke at Marwood Hall, you did not once look at Silas Corvin's face for approval, because it had not occurred to you to want it. I noticed that when Thomas looked at you the first time he did not flinch, and Thomas has flinched at every person who has entered our house for 14 months. Harriet, I noticed you. I have been noticing you steadily since the day of the loaf, and I did not come out into your parish looking for a wife, and I did not sit in your churchyard hoping for one, and I do not, before God, propose to insult you by pretending that any of this began in the ordinary way. But I would be a coward if I did not say it now, and my father called me many things, but not, in the end, a coward. And I will not disappoint him in this. I would like Harriet Ashcombe to marry you. You. Not because you are useful to me, though you are. Not because Thomas needs a mother, though he does. Because I have been walking about your parish for 8 weeks and I do not want, any longer, to walk about it without you. I have looked at every mirror my father warned me of, and I have looked at you. You are the only clean glass I have found. She stood on the field path. The wind moved in the low grass at her feet. She did not, for a strange moment, know what her hands were for. Your Grace, she said. Her voice was steady. She had trained it. That was a very long speech. I meant every word of it. I know that you did. That is what makes it inconvenient. Alistair. May I say a thing? You may say anything. I am a large woman. I have been a large woman since I was 12. The village of Marwood Underhill has known it about me for 15 years, and has drawn its conclusions, and I have carried the conclusions on my back for so long I have forgotten, most days, that I am carrying anything at all. And, if you are asking me to marry you, because you have decided you can bear my size, or because you wish to prove something to yourself about your father's mirror, I would rather you did not ask. I would rather feed you bread on a Tuesday morning for the rest of my life, and never see your coat again, than be some man's proof of anything. He was quiet. Harriet, he said, come here. She did not move. I am not asking you to come far, he said, 1 step. She stepped. He took her hand. His hand was the hand she had noticed on the first morning, the long, clean fingers, the careful economy. It closed round hers with the same discipline it had closed round the loaf. Listen to me, he said. I am not marrying you, despite anything. I am marrying you. You. The whole of you. The woman who stands in a field with mud on her hem, and tells a duke he has made a long speech. I have looked at a great many women in a great many rooms, and I have not, in my life, wanted to marry one of them, because I could not find in any of them what you set in front of me on the first morning, without knowing you had done it. You are, Harriet Ashcombe, a beautiful woman. I am aware that the village of Marwood Underhill has not troubled to tell you so. I am telling you so. Plainly. As a fact, I am not being kind. I am being honest, and I am tired of being anything else. She looked at him, he looked at her. There was, in her chest, a thing she had trained herself not to have. She let it have her for 1 clean breath. Alistair, she said. Yes. I do not bargain with half a story. If I marry you, I marry Thomas also. He is not a condition of the arrangement. He is part of it, and he will remain part of it, and his mother's name will not be spoken over in that house. Her portrait stays where it is. Her hymn is sung if he wishes it sung. I do not replace her. I stand where she cannot. Say you understand. I understand. Say it in full. Anne will remain his mother. Her portrait stays. Her hymn is his. You will not be asked to be her, Harriet, because I do not want you to be. I want you to be you. That is the whole of it. Then, yes, she said. Yes, yes, Alistair. I will, I will. He kissed her, then, in the field path. And it was not a practiced kiss, and it was not the kiss of a duke. It was the kiss of a man who had walked out of his own house to learn whether there was any goodness left in the country, and had found it kneading dough in a small kitchen, and did not mean to lose it again. They walked back to the lane. Thomas was on Mrs. Fenn's step, eating a piece of cake with both hands. He looked up when they came. He looked at his father, and then at Harriet, and then, very solemnly, back at his father. "Papa," he said. "Yes, Thomas. Is Miss Ashcombe coming home with us?" "She is." Thomas considered this. He set down the piece of cake. He climbed off the step. He walked with the same small, careful economy his father had, across the mud of the lane to where Harriet stood, and he took her hand in his, a small hand, a cold hand, and he said, quite clearly, "Then I will hold your other side so you do not slip in the mud." Mrs. Fenn, on her step, dropped her mending. "There is, child, no need to make more of the moment than the moment made of itself." A boy, who had not held a hand in 14 months, held one. A woman who had never expected to be asked was asked. A duke who had gone out into the world to find a mirror had brought it home. That was all. It was, of course, everything. They married in the little church of Marwood in April, because Harriet would not be hurried, and Alistair would not be prevented. She wore a gown that fit her exactly as she was, and her mother's small pearl at her throat, and she walked up the aisle on the arm of old Mr. Peel of the Toll, because her father was dead, and Mr. Peel had bought a loaf from her every Tuesday, for 11 years, and Thomas walked beside her, carrying the ring on a small cushion, and he did not speak in the church, but he sang, quite softly, during the hymn, and Alistair, the Duke of Ravenshaw, who did not weep, wept once, and did not trouble to hide it. Silas Corvin was not there. He was in London, they said, in reduced circumstances, though not so reduced as to trouble anyone. The village of Marwood under Hill, which had verdicted upon Harriet Ashcombe at 7, held its collective tongue and its collective breath. And Mrs.